never thought my family could fall apart in a single night, but that's exactly what happened. One moment, I was living in a home where I knew the rhythms, the arguments, the laughter, even the silences. The next, everything was stripped away, leaving me in a world where nothing made sense anymore. It started with my brother. Ethan was 2 years older than me, and even though we fought constantly, he had always been my protector. When the kids at school made fun of me, Ethan was the one who shoved them into lockers or scared them into silence. When I had nightmares as a child, he would sit on the floor by my bed, muttering insults about monsters, until I laughed myself back to sleep. He was reckless, stubborn, and too loyal for his own good. The night everything changed, he was supposed to be at a party. I remember because I begged him not to go. Mom and Dad were away at a wedding out of town, and it was just us in the house. I was 16, old enough to stay home alone, but something about that night made me uneasy. The sky had gone dark too fast, the air too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. "Don't be such a baby," Ethan said, shoving his jacket on. "I'll be back before midnight. Lock the doors, okay?" I stood at the window after he left, watching the taillights of his car vanish into the night. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me. Hours dragged by, and midnight came and went. Ethan didn't return. I called his phone a dozen times, each one going to voicemail. By 2 in the morning, I was pacing the living room, staring at the clock, my heart racing. That's when the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It was sharp, insistent, rattling the door in its frame. My first instinct was to hide. I crept to the peephole, and what I saw made my stomach drop. 2 police officers stood on the porch, their faces grim. One of them was holding Ethan's wallet. They told me there had been an accident. A car found abandoned at the edge of the woods, headlights still on, the driver's door wide open. No sign of Ethan, just blood on the steering wheel. I remember shaking my head, insisting they were wrong. Ethan was tough, invincible. He'd probably wandered off, or maybe someone else had taken the car. But when they handed me his wallet, his driver's license smeared with blood, I couldn't deny it anymore. By the time Mom and Dad rushed home, the house was crawling with police. They called it a disappearance, maybe foul play. They asked me 100 questions I couldn't answer. Did Ethan have enemies? Was he involved in anything dangerous? I wanted to laugh. Ethan was reckless, but he wasn't a criminal. He wasn't stupid enough to cross the wrong people. But then I remembered something. 2 days before he vanished, I had walked past his room and heard him on the phone. His voice was low, tense, not the usual careless tone he used with his friends. I heard him say, "I told you, I'll get it. Just give me more time." When I asked him later, he brushed it off, said it was about a video game he owed money for. I hadn't believed him then, and I sure as hell didn't believe it now. The weeks that followed were a blur. Search parties combed the woods. Flyers with Ethan's face were stapled to every telephone pole in town. Reporters knocked on our door, their cameras flashing in our grief-stricken faces. Mom cried constantly. Dad grew silent, and I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. But then something happened that made everything worse. 3 weeks after Ethan disappeared, I found an envelope taped to my bedroom window. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, scrawled in messy handwriting. "Your brother wasn't who you thought he was. Stop looking for him, or you'll end up the same." I read it over and over until the words blurred. I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, some sick kid from school trying to get attention. But deep down, I knew it was real. I didn't tell Mom and Dad. They were already broken. I couldn't add more weight to their grief. Instead, I kept it to myself, shoving the letter into my desk drawer and trying to forget it. But I couldn't. The words haunted me, whispering in my ear at night, echoing in the silence of our home. And then the second letter came. This one wasn't taped to my window. It was slid under the front door in the middle of the night. I woke to the sound of paper scratching against the floorboards. My heart pounded as I crept down the stairs, the house too quiet, every shadow stretching like claws. The envelope was there, waiting. Inside was a photograph. It was Ethan, sitting in a chair, his hands tied behind his back, his face bruised and bloody. His eyes stared straight at the camera, filled with a mix of fear and defiance. On the back of the photo were 3 words. He betrayed us.
I sank to the floor, the photo shaking in my hands. This wasn't just a disappearance. This wasn't just an accident. Ethan had been taken. And whoever had him wanted me to know. From that moment, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just wait for the police to find him. I started digging, retracing his steps, talking to his friends. Most of them claimed they didn't know anything, but a few slipped up. One admitted Ethan had been hanging out with a new crowd lately, older guys who drove expensive cars and never came around during the day. Another mentioned seeing him with a man named Marcus, someone everyone in town knew to avoid. I found Marcus outside a pool hall, leaning against a black car with tinted windows. He looked at me like he knew exactly who I was before I even opened my mouth. "You're Ethan's sister," he said, a smile creeping across his face. "He talked about you." I demanded to know where Ethan was, what had happened to him. Marcus laughed, low and cruel. "Your brother made promises he couldn't keep," he said. "He thought he could play games with people way above his level. And now he's paying the price. I asked if Ethan was alive. The smile on Marcus's face faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. If you're smart, he said, leaning close enough that I could smell the smoke on his breath, you'll stop asking questions. Because the people he crossed? They don't like loose ends. I walked away, my legs trembling, my stomach churning. But instead of scaring me off, his words lit a fire in me. If Ethan was in trouble, I wasn't going to abandon him. I didn't care who he had crossed or what promises he had broken. He was my brother. And I was going to bring him home. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized Marcus had been right. Ethan wasn't the brother I thought I knew. I walked away from Marcus, but his words followed me like shadows that wouldn't let go. Every step home felt heavier. His warning wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And promises from men like him weren't empty. When I finally shut the door behind me, the house felt smaller than ever. Mom was sitting at the table, clutching one of Ethan's hoodies like a lifeline. Dad was pacing the living room, muttering about the uselessness of the police. I stood there in the doorway, Marcus's cigarette smoke still clinging to my clothes, and for the first time, I felt like I couldn't tell them everything. What was I supposed to say? That Ethan had been hanging around men like Marcus? That he had gotten himself in so deep, they tied him to a chair and beaten him bloody? That the people who had him now were powerful enough to leave letters on my window and front door without ever being seen? I swallowed it down. I told them nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Marcus's voice, the way he had said, loose ends. I stared at the photo of Ethan for hours, memorizing every bruise, every drop of blood. He looked defiant, even tied up. That was Ethan. Stubborn to the end. But fear lived in his eyes too. And that was what broke me. I hid the photo under my mattress, sliding it deep so Mom or Dad wouldn't find it. They were already falling apart. Mom barely ate anymore. Dad barely spoke. If they saw that picture, it would finish them. The next morning, I woke to whispers. Neighbors had gathered in the street again, pretending to care. I saw them peering at our house, shaking their heads, gossiping behind cupped hands. I wanted to scream at them that they didn't know Ethan, that they didn't know what we were going through. Instead, I shut the blinds and stayed inside. At school, things were worse. Kids stared. Some whispered theories. That Ethan had overdosed. That he joined a gang. That he'd run away because he couldn't handle our family. One girl asked me if it was true he'd been killed and dumped in the woods. I snapped, shoving her so hard she fell into a locker. I got detention, but I didn't care. Every day that passed without Ethan felt like another nail in a coffin no one wanted to admit existed. But I couldn't let it end there, so I went back to Marcus.
This time, I waited outside the pool hall until he came out, flanked by two men who looked like they'd been carved from stone. He saw me instantly and smirked, like he'd been expecting me. "You've got guts, kid," he said, leaning against his car. "But guts won't keep you alive." "I need proof he's alive," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. "If you want me to stop asking questions, show me he's okay." One of his men stepped forward, but Marcus held up a hand. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp and calculating. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out another photograph. This one was worse. Ethan was still tied, but now his lip was split open. Blood smeared down his chin. His head hung low, his eyes half closed. I gasped, my knees nearly buckling. Marcus tucked the photo back into his jacket before I could grab it. "You see?" he said. "Your brother's alive, for now. But if you keep poking around, if you keep running that mouth of yours, he won't be. And trust me, you don't want his blood on your hands." He got into his car and drove off, leaving me standing in the parking lot trembling. For the rest of the week, I couldn't eat. I couldn't think about anything but Ethan tied to that chair, fading with each passing day. Every sound outside the house made me jump. Every knock at the door sent my heart racing. I kept waiting for another letter, another photo, another threat. It came on Friday. I was in my room when I heard the scrape of paper against the floor. I froze. Slowly, I crept down the stairs. Another envelope lay under the front door, pale against the dark wood. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a map. It was hand-drawn, rough, but clear enough. It showed the edge of the woods where Ethan's car had been found, with a path marked in red. At the bottom, in the same jagged handwriting as before, were two words: "Come alone." I stared at it until the lines blurred. I knew it was a trap. I knew whoever sent it didn't want to help me. They wanted to lure me in, maybe use me as leverage against Ethan. But what choice did I have? I couldn't tell Mom and Dad. They'd lock the doors, call the police, beg me not to go. The police would only scare off whoever was behind this. And if they were willing to send me a map, it meant Ethan was still alive. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, I packed a flashlight, a pocket knife I found in Dad's toolbox, and a bottle of water. I waited until the house was silent, then slipped out the back door. The woods loomed in the distance, dark and endless. My legs shook as I walked toward them, but I kept going. The path on the map was real. I followed it, my flashlight beam trembling across the dirt. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No crickets, no owls, just silence. My skin prickled. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A small clearing, lit by a single lantern hanging from a branch. My heart pounded as I stepped into the light, There was a chair in the center of the clearing, empty. A rope lay on the ground beside it, frayed and stained. I spun around, searching for Ethan, for anyone. But the clearing was empty. Then I heard it, a voice behind me. "You should have stayed home." I whipped around, my flashlight beam landing on a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a hood. He held a gun casually, like it was just an extension of his hand. "Where's my brother?" I demanded, my voice breaking. He laughed, low and cold. "Your brother's already made his choices. Now you've made yours." He raised the gun. Panic surged through me. I dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly, and lunged forward, slashing with the pocket knife. It barely grazed his arm, but it was enough. He cursed, stumbling back, and I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots caught at my feet, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until the trees blurred together. Behind me, I heard footsteps, shouts, but eventually they faded. When I finally burst out of the woods, I collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for air. My hands shook, the knife slick with sweat. I looked down at the map, crumpled in my pocket, and realized the truth. They weren't just threatening me anymore. They wanted me gone. And if they were willing to kill me, then whatever Ethan was caught up in was bigger than I could have imagined. I made it home just before dawn, slipping back into the house unnoticed. I collapsed onto my bed, my body trembling, my mind racing. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I had to tell someone. But who? Mom and Dad were too broken, too fragile. The police couldn't be trusted. What if they were already involved? That left only one person. Uncle Ray. Ray wasn't really my uncle. He was Dad's old friend, the kind who showed up for barbecues and birthdays, but lived on the edge of town in a cluttered house full of tools and secrets. He'd done time years ago for something he never talked about, but he'd always been kind to me and Ethan. Dad said he wasn't a good influence, but right now, I needed someone who understood how the world really worked. The next day, I biked to his place. The yard was littered with rusted cars, the porch sagging under the weight of forgotten junk. Ray answered the door in a stained t-shirt, his eyes bloodshot, but when he saw me, his face softened. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked. I told him everything. The letters, the photos, Marcus, the man in the woods. His expression grew darker with every word. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw and muttered, "Damn it, Ethan." "What do you mean?" I asked. Ray sighed. "Your brother. He got involved with people he shouldn't have. Marcus is small time compared to who's really behind this. If they've got him, it's not just about money. It's about power. And if they're coming after you now, it means they think you know more than you do." My stomach turned. "So what do I do?" Ray leaned in, his eyes sharp. "You keep your head down. You act normal, but you don't stop digging. You find out what Ethan was into, who he was dealing with, and you come to me, not the cops. You understand?" I nodded, even though fear coiled tighter in my chest. Because deep down, I knew Ray was right. If I wanted to save Ethan, I had to become part of his world. Ray's words clung to me like smoke I couldn't wash off. If you want to save Ethan, you have to become part of his world. I replayed them in my head on the ride home, my bike wheels crunching over gravel, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Part of his world. A world I didn't understand. A world that had already swallowed him whole. When I walked into the house, Mom was sitting in front of the TV, staring at the news but not watching it. Dad was in the kitchen, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the counter. They barely noticed me. They had become ghosts in their own home, drifting through rooms like shadows. If they knew what I was doing, who I was talking to, it would break them. So I kept it to myself. That night, I pulled Ethan's old backpack from the closet. It still smelled like him. Sweat, cologne, and the faintest trace of cigarettes he thought I didn't know about. I dumped it out on my bed. Textbooks, crumpled notes, a few coins. Nothing unusual. But then I felt something at the bottom, tucked into a hidden zipper pocket. It was a phone. Not his regular one. This was a cheap burner, scratched and dirty. My pulse quickened as I powered it on. The screen lit up with a password prompt. 4 digits. I tried his birthday. Wrong. Mine. Wrong. Our house number. Wrong. I was about to give up when I tried Mom's birthday. It unlocked. Messages filled the screen. Dozens of them from numbers with no names. Some were short. Delivery tonight. Money first. Others were longer, filled with codes and addresses I didn't recognize. My stomach turned as I scrolled. Ethan had been in deep, deeper than I had ever imagined. One message caught my eye. It was dated the night he disappeared. Final chance. Woods. Midnight. Don't be late. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. That was it. That was where he'd gone. He hadn't just been at a party. He'd been walking into a trap. I showed the phone to Ray the next day. His eyes darkened as he scrolled through the messages. "This isn't small time," he muttered. "This is organized. Whoever your brother was dealing with, they don't forgive mistakes. And they don't let people walk away." "Then how do I find him?" I asked, my voice cracking. Ray looked at me for a long moment. "You don't," he said finally. "Not unless you're ready to risk everything." But I was already in too deep. That night, another letter came. This one wasn't slipped under the door. It was sitting on my pillow when I got home from school. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in my room. The letter was short. Stop digging. Last warning. I wanted to scream, to rip it to shreds, but instead, I shoved it into the drawer with the others. My fear was being replaced with something else now. Anger. Whoever was doing this thought they could scare me into silence. They didn't know me at all. The next morning, I told Ray about the letter. He cursed, then handed me a small black box. It's a tracker, he said. Slip it into someone's car and we'll know where they go. I stared at it, the weight of it heavy in my palm. Who do we track? Marcus, he said. If he's still circling, he'll lead us to whoever's pulling the strings. So that's what we did. I followed Marcus after school, heart pounding as I trailed his black car through back streets. When he finally parked outside the pool hall, I forced myself to walk past, my fingers shaking as I crouched by his bumper and stuck the tracker in place. Every second felt like an eternity, but no one saw me. That night, Ray pulled up the tracker's feed on his laptop. The little dot moved slowly across the map, weaving through streets I didn't recognize, before finally stopping on the edge of town. An old warehouse district, long abandoned. Ray's jaw tightened. That's where they're keeping him. We decided to go the next night. But someone must have known what we were planning. Because the following afternoon, I found another envelope in my locker at school. Inside was another photo of Ethan. But this time, he wasn't tied up. He was standing, arms crossed, looking straight at the camera with a smirk. And on the back, scrawled in messy ink, were the words, "He doesn't want to be found." I stared at it until my vision blurred. My knees buckled, and I slid to the floor. The world tilted around me. What did it mean? Was Ethan part of this now? Had he joined them willingly? Or was it a lie meant to break me? I didn't know. But I was going to find out. Shoved the photo into my bag before anyone could see it. The rest of the school day passed in a haze. Teachers spoke, kids laughed, but none of it reached me. My head throbbed with questions. He doesn't want to be found. The words spun in my mind like knives. Was it possible? Could Ethan have chosen this? Or were they trying to twist me? To make me doubt everything I knew? By the time I biked to Ray's house, the sun was sinking low, bleeding red across the horizon. I slammed the photo onto his table. He picked it up, studied it, and his brows furrowed. "It's a setup," he said finally. "They want you to think he's gone over to their side. Don't fall for it." "But what if it's true?" I asked, my voice breaking. What if he doesn't want to come back?" Ray shook his head. "No, they're manipulating you. They're good at it, and that's how they keep people in line, by breaking the ones who care." I wanted to believe him, but the image of Ethan smirking at the camera burned in my mind. That wasn't the brother I remembered. That wasn't the boy who sat on my floor to chase away my nightmares. That night, I couldn't stay still. I paced my room until my legs ached, staring out the window at the dark street. Every car that passed, every rustle of leaves felt like someone watching me. I barely slept. The next day, Ray and I went to the warehouse. We parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest, keeping to the shadows. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded it, a padlock hanging loose on the gate. Inside it was worse. The air smelled of dust and rot. Broken pallets littered the floor, and shafts of light cut through the holes in the roof. We moved carefully, our footsteps echoing. Then I heard it. A voice. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Ethan." I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. "That's him," I whispered. Ray held up a hand, motioning for silence. We crept toward the sound, weaving between stacks of crates. The voice grew clearer. Ethan was arguing with someone. "You said it would be done by now," he snapped. "I've held up my end." Another voice replied, low and menacing. "You're in no position to make demands. You work for us now." My breath caught. Work for us now. We reached the edge of a crate stack and peeked around. There he was, Ethan, alive, standing in front of 2 men I didn't recognize. His face was bruised, but his posture was defiant, his eyes sharp. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like he belonged. Ray cursed under his breath. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "We need to go," he whispered. "No," I hissed. "We can't just leave him. He's not tied up. He's not begging for help. He's with them," Ray said. His grip on my arm tightened. "If they see us, we're dead." I wanted to scream, to run to Ethan and demand answers. But I knew Ray was right. We slipped out the way we came, hearts pounding. When we finally reached the car, I collapsed into the seat, shaking. My brother was alive, but he wasn't a victim anymore. He was part of it. On the drive back, Ray said nothing. Neither did I. My thoughts were too loud, too tangled. Ethan wasn't the brother I remembered. He had chosen this. Or maybe he hadn't had a choice at all. When I got home, another envelope was waiting on my pillow. No words this time, just another photo. Ethan again. But this time, he was smiling. A real smile. Not defiance, not fear. And beside him was Marcus. My stomach dropped. The message was clear. Ethan wasn't just with them. He was one of them. The days that followed blurred together. I went through the motions at school, came home to the same silence, the same broken parents, the same creeping dread. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. How could I? How could I look Mom in the eye and tell her that the boy she cried for every night had chosen the people who took him? I kept going back to Ray's. We pored over the phone, the texts, the photos. Ray made calls to people I didn't know, men with rough voices and quick tempers. Slowly, a picture started to form. Ethan had been running product for them. Drugs, weapons. Ray wouldn't say exactly, but it was bad. He'd gotten in over his head, promised more than he could deliver. When he couldn't pay up, they took him. Not to punish him, but to own him, to make him theirs. And now, he was working for them willingly. Or maybe not willingly. Maybe he was trapped, playing along to survive. I clung to the thought like a lifeline. Then came the night that changed everything. Ray called me after midnight. His voice was urgent. "They're moving something tonight," he said. "If we can catch them, we'll know where Ethan stands." I met him by the old bridge. The air was thick with fog. The river below whispering like secrets. We hid in the shadows as headlights approached. A black SUV rolled up, followed by a van. Men got out, carrying crates. And then I saw him. Ethan. He was helping them unload, his face set in grim determination. He laughed at something Marcus said, the sound sharp in the night air. My chest ached. Ray muttered a curse. "He's gone." "No, I whispered. "He's pretending. He has to be." But then Ethan looked up. For a brief second, our eyes met across the fog. His expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, no recognition. He just looked at me, then turned away. Ray grabbed my arm. "We have to go." We slipped away before they could see us. I didn't speak the entire drive home. My heart felt like stone in my chest. The next morning, another envelope waited for me. Inside was a single scrap of paper with 2 words. "Choose sides." I stared at it until my vision blurred. My brother was alive, but he wasn't the same. He was part of them now. And sooner or later, I was going to have to decide. Stand with him or stand against him. And either way, it would destroy me. The words wouldn't leave me. Choose sides. They echoed in my head at school, at home, in my dreams. They felt less like a threat and more like a countdown. As if some invisible clock had started ticking, and the moment I chose wrong, it would all be over. I kept the note hidden under my mattress with the others, but I couldn't hide it from myself. Every time I tried to focus on homework, on a conversation, on anything normal, it surfaced. Choose sides. Like Ethan had forced me into his world, and now there was no way out. At home, things had gone from bad to worse. Mom hardly left her room anymore. She'd sit by the window, staring out like she expected Ethan to walk up the driveway any minute. Sometimes she whispered his name, like if she said it enough times, he'd appear. Dad was the opposite, restless, angry. He snapped at me for small things, slammed doors, muttered about the police being useless. We were 3 people living in the same house, each of us drowning in our own way. I thought about telling them everything. The letters, the photos, the warehouse, the bridge. But what would that do? It would break them completely. Or worse, it would make them try to get involved, and they weren't ready for that kind of danger. No one was. So I went back to Ray. He was waiting on the porch when I arrived, smoking a cigarette down to the filter. He looked older than usual, his eyes heavy with shadows. I handed him the choose sides note, and he read it twice before tossing it into the fire pit. "They're pushing you," he said. "They want to see if you'll crack." "Then what do I do?" I asked. Ray exhaled smoke, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You don't choose. Not yet. You keep your eyes open. You wait. The moment will come when you have to act. But until then, you stay quiet. You stay smart." It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Because silence doesn't stop the nightmares. It doesn't stop the paranoia. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar car parked on our street, made my pulse race. I started sleeping with the pocket knife under my pillow. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A new message. No number, just unknown. "Meet me, old train tracks, midnight, come alone." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my fingers trembling. It had to be a trap. Every instinct screamed at me not to go. But deep down, I knew who it was. Ethan. I didn't tell Ray. I didn't tell anyone. At 11:30, I slipped out the back door, my hoodie pulled tight against the cold. The train tracks cut across the edge of town, weeds growing high between the rusted rails. The air smelled like damp earth and iron. When I got there, he was waiting. Ethan. He looked thinner, older, his face marked with bruises that hadn't fully healed. But his eyes were the same. For a moment, I froze. Every memory of us as kids flooding back. The nights he sat on my floor, the times he shoved bullies away from me. The way he always said, "I've got your back." "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice was softer than I remembered, but still his. I stepped closer, my heart racing. "Ethan, what's happening? Why are you with them?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "It's not that simple." "Not that simple?" I snapped. "You disappeared, left us thinking you were dead." They sent me pictures of you tied up, beaten. And now you're just working with them? His eyes flicked back to mine, sharp and pained. I didn't have a choice. Then why the photos? Why the notes? He hesitated, then shook his head. They wanted to test you. To see if you'd break. You didn't. My stomach twisted. So what now? Am I supposed to just sit back and watch you destroy yourself? Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen to me. Everything you've seen, everything they've shown you, it's part of something bigger. Marcus isn't the boss. He's just a pawn. The real power is higher, dangerous. If you keep digging, they'll come after you harder than they already have. Then leave, I begged. Come home. His expression hardened. I can't. If I leave, they'll kill me. And if I try to run, they'll come for you, for Mom, for Dad. Tears blurred my vision. So what, you're just theirs now? Forever? He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed something into my hand, a folded slip of paper. Keep this safe, he said. If anything happens to me, give it to Ray. Not the cops, only Ray. And before I could ask what it was, headlights cut across the tracks. A car was coming. Ethan's eyes widened. Go, he hissed. Now! I stumbled back, clutching the paper, my heart racing. He slipped into the shadows as the car pulled up. 2 men climbing out. I didn't stick around to see more. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed in my bed, the paper still clenched in my fist. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a list of names. Half of them I didn't recognize, but 2 I did. One was Marcus. The other was Ray. I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my bed, staring at the paper, my mind spinning. Why was Ray's name on that list? Was Ethan warning me about him? Or was Ray deeper in this than he'd let on? The next morning, I biked to Ray's like nothing was wrong. He was in the garage, tinkering with an engine. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. You look like hell, he said. I forced a laugh. Didn't sleep. He handed me a wrench. That makes 2 of us. I wanted to confront him right then, to shove the paper in his face and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. Over the next few days, I watched him closely. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way his phone lit up with messages he never let me see. The way he avoided certain questions. The way his mood shifted whenever Ethan's name came up. And then one night, I followed him. He drove out of town, past the warehouse district, into the hills. I kept my distance, my heart pounding as his taillights weaved through the dark. Finally, he pulled into a clearing where 2 cars were already waiting. I killed my bike light and crept closer. Voices carried through the night. Ray's voice. She doesn't know. She thinks I'm helping her. But if she finds out... Another voice cut him off, low and sharp. Then you'll take care of it. You know the deal. My stomach lurched. Ray wasn't just helping me. He was helping them. I backed away, my hands trembling, my breath coming fast. Leaves crunched under my feet, and for a terrifying moment, the voices stopped. I froze, pressing myself against a tree, my heart pounding in my ears. Then a laugh, a car door slamming, engines roaring to life. The cars pulled away, their headlights fading into the distance. I didn't move until the silence settled again. Then I ran. By the time I made it home, my legs felt like lead, my lungs burning. I locked my bedroom door, pulled the paper from its hiding spot, and stared at Ray's name again. It all made sense now. Ray had been playing me from the start. That realization changed everything. I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anyone. The people I thought were on my side were working against me. My brother was caught in something bigger than I could understand, and the only person I thought could help me was a traitor. The next morning, I skipped school. I rode back to the train tracks, hoping, praying Ethan would be there again. He wasn't. The tracks were empty, silent except for the wind rattling the weeds. But someone had been there. Taped to the rail was another envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was me, standing in my bedroom window, staring out into the night. I dropped the photo, my hands shaking, bile rising in my throat. They weren't just watching Ethan. They were watching me, inside my own home. And suddenly, choose sides didn't feel like a threat anymore. It felt like a command. I remember the moment I decided I wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. It wasn't some cinematic revelation, no lightning flash, no triumphant music. It was a small, vicious clarity, like snapping awake from a dream and realizing the dream had been 2 years long and stolen everything. I held that photo of myself, taped to the rail, in shaking hands, and realized they had been inside my life for months. Cameras, photos, notes, threats. They had eyes on my house, on my bedroom, on my family. Whoever they were, they had the time and the patience to gaslight a whole town, and they had the power to pull threads until people we trusted were dancing for them. Ray's betrayal punched through me like a physical blow. I had to think of him as the steady hand who fixed our car, the man who took me fishing as a kid, the guy who'd given Ethan advice and maybe too many second chances. But now there was photographic proof of him talking to them in the hills, proof that his name was on Ethan's list. It should have been the end of him in my life. I should have burned every memory of him and walked away. Instead, I put the photo back in my pocket and made myself move. There were 3 things I needed to do, and I knew them with a cold, simple logic. Find Ethan. expose who was behind everything, and protect Mom and Dad. The order didn't matter as much as the fact that all three had to be done. I couldn't trust the police. They had missed the clues, or worse, been part of the machinery that ruined Dad's career. I still had nightmares about how a clip of footage could be misfiled, a report lost. The stranger in the woods, who aimed a gun at me, proved they were willing to use violence. I had to play dirty to beat them. The first move was to confront Ray, but not like the broken girl who followed him before. I needed leverage and a plan. I sat in my car across the street from his house for 3 hours that afternoon, hands on the steering wheel, replaying every conversation, every odd behavior, every unexplained favor he'd done. If he was working both sides, he would have patterns. People like him always did. He was sloppy in the places they expected him to be careful. Petty lies, borrowed money he never repaid, vague appointments that always became work things. Those things gave me a thread I could pull. At dusk, I walked up his driveway. He was on the porch, arms folded, smudged with grease like he'd never left the garage. When he saw me, his face did something I couldn't read, a blankness, then a guarded smile. "You okay, kid?" he said. He always called me kid, no matter how old I got, like I was still the small person he'd once protected. "Cut the act," I said. I had rehearsed this. "Why is your name on Ethan's list?" His face tightened. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. "You shouldn't be here." "I could have followed you last week," I said. "I saw the cars. I heard you talking. Who are you meeting with, Ray? Who are they?" Silence stretched. He looked at the garage as if he could find the right words among the tools. Finally, he sighed. "You don't understand how it works," he said. "You don't know the people he got involved with. You think Marcus is the problem? Marcus is an annoyance. The people above him..." "You swear you'll help me find Ethan," I interrupted. "If you help me now, we give the paper to the DA, and we hand over everything. Or you walk, and I tell Mom everything. Which do you prefer?" He closed his eyes and cursed softly. He was a coward in the parts he couldn't reconcile, but he also had a survival instinct that had kept him alive longer than he should have been. He folded under pressure when he thought someone could ruin him. For the first time, I saw fear in his face that wasn't the performative kind. It was real. "All right," he said finally. "There's a man. Calls himself Gray. He's not local. He runs things quiet. Marcus plays for him sometimes. Gray doesn't like loose ends. He had a hand in Ethan's recruitment. If you want to get to Gray, you follow the money. There's a drop at the docks. He uses a shell company, Ames Logistics. 2 guys pick up crates near the old pier on Tuesday nights. That's where he moves product." "Why are you involved?" I asked. Ray's shoulders slumped. "They came to me with a story about debts and threats. They said if I didn't help, they'd hurt someone I knew. I thought I could be cunning and keep my hands clean. I helped with cars, with transport. I never touched the product. I thought it would stop. It didn't." "You put your name on a list with Ethan?" I whispered. "I tried to warn him," he said. His voice turned small. He laughed at first, said he could handle it. Then He stopped, looking suddenly very old. "They made sure I understood what I had to do." I hated him in that moment with a hot, clean hate that ached. But I also understood how people slip, how fear makes you barter with your soul. Still, I didn't let him off the hook. "You will help me get Ethan. You will help me bring these people down. Or I walk to the DA with everything. You decide." He looked at me like I was a pickaxe he had to choose whether to swing. "One thing," he said slowly. "When it comes to Gray, you don't go alone. He's dangerous. And he's not just about product smuggling. He has connections. Cops, politicians, people who owe him favors. If we go to the DA, we go together, with hard proof. I can get a raid, but it will take time. Time. That was the one thing we were running out of. Ethan could be pulled deeper, or worse. Over the next week, we moved like spies. We stole the moments the world allowed us. The half hour when Mom made dinner and Dad watched sports. The hour that felt less watched at night. Ray used his contacts, a mechanic friend at the pier who owed him a favor, a waitress at a diner who liked playing cards with the dock workers. I watched him in a new light. He was clumsy, regretful, precise in the places that mattered. He knew how to get a man into a place and out without being noticed. But he also knew how to cover tracks that would later be traced, which made him useful and dangerous. On the first Tuesday, we watched the pier. Gray's operation wasn't cinematic. There were no men in suits, flashing cash, or muscle-bound thugs loading crates. It was simple and boring. A beat-up van, a man with tired eyes who methodically transferred boxes from the van to a ship container. The worker had a face like any other man, weathered, spread with small scars. He had a cigarette hanging from his lip and a resigned look, like he was doing a job until retirement. Ray filmed everything on a phone he kept hidden in a lawn chair, his fingers shaking with the cold. "That's him," he whispered. "The man with the cigarette. He's a courier. Not Gray, but he moves Gray stuff." I watched the courier until the camera gave up and the clip was shaky and grainy and perfect. It was enough to track financial trails. Ray and I spent the next 3 nights combing public records, looking for companies that match the rosters mentioned in Ethan's texts. Ames Logistics surfaced as a paper company with no real office except a mailbox. Its director was a shell company owner, and the account skimmed through the same bank that popped up in one of the burner phones. We sent everything, carefully, to an email address Ray had for an old friend in the DA's office, someone who owed Ray a favor and had a reputation for moral scruples. We had a plan: push the DA's friend enough to open a quiet investigation and, if they found anything, coordinate a raid. That plan relied on trust in a system that had broken once, but sometimes you had to bet on slow, dirty institutions. If the DA moved quietly and quickly, Gray wouldn't have time to silence key witnesses. Then the world shifted again in a way that tore the nerves raw. Ethan called me. He used a number I didn't recognize, voice chopped and thin like he was talking through water. "They're watching you," he said immediately, no greeting. "Don't trust Ray." I laughed sharp, a brittle sound. "You just told me to give Ray the paper if something happened. Now you tell me not to trust him?" "No," he said. "Listen, I didn't tell you to trust him. I told you to give it to him only if—" He stopped. For a second, his voice was softer, the voice I remembered. "Lily, you have to listen. Gray's deeper than we thought. He uses people with histories. Ray isn't who he says he is. He's compromised. He helps you, but he's also been paid off. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I can't get you out of this anymore." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You just told me yesterday to give the paper to Ray. Now you're telling me not to trust him. Which is it, Ethan?" "I didn't say that," he said, anger replacing fear. "You have to trust—" Static. The line clipped. He called back 5 minutes later. "Get to the warehouse under the old mill. Midnight. Alone. Come alone." The voice was flat, determined in a way that made my stomach lurch. "You send me photos with your face bruised, and then you tell me to come alone to a warehouse?" I shot back. "Just come," he said. "We'll end this. You owe me." I felt like something inside me was ripped open. He'd given me the list naming Ray, and then called me alone. Part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall. Part of me wanted to drive to the DA's office, push the evidence into their hands, and run. But the person who left their brother tied up and bled into a photo would not be soothed by rational moves. I was his sister. I went. The old mill sat at the edge of town, bricks crumbling like old teeth. I parked my car in the ditch and walked through knee-high grass until the mill loomed above me like a sleeping animal. My heart was a drum in my chest. I kept my phone camera on record and my pocket knife hidden. Inside, the air smelled of dust and oil. I moved quietly, following the echoes until I saw a shadow. Then Ethan. He stood in the center of the mess of crates and broken machines, hands empty, head bowed. For a second, I thought he was going to run into my arms. "You okay?" I whispered. He looked up. The bruise across his cheekbone was new. His eyes were bloodshot. He smiled. A thin, brittle thing. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Before I could respond, lights flipped on. Men surrounded us. Marcus stepped out of the gloom, hands folded, a grin that never touched his eyes. Behind him, a man I had never seen before stepped forward. He was gregarious gray, taller than the photos had suggested, older, with the sort of coldness that made the room feel smaller. His smile was small and precise. "You were supposed to come alone," Gray said, clapping softly. "How quaint that your little brother couldn't follow directions." I wanted to ask why he was doing this, why this cruelty. I wanted to ask Ethan why he'd let it consume him, but the words stuck. Ray was there too. Ray. He stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching me like a man supervising a job. I felt bile rise. He looked back at me, and for 1 minute his face was unreadable, then flicked with regret as if he felt my stare like a blow. Gray gestured. "You've been very entertaining, watching you run in circles. But the one question remains. Do you have the stomach to choose sides?" Ethan stepped forward. "Let her go," he said. His voice was hoarse, but there was fire in it. Gray laughed. "Oh, a plea from the prodigal. How touching. But you understand the rules. Loyalty is earned, and we no longer have use for your family's inconvenience." My mind raced. "You can let him go," I said, trying to anchor my voice to something steady. "You don't have to do this." Gray's gaze slid over me like a blade. "You don't understand. People are currency. It's about leverage. It's about testing who will fall apart when the pressure is on. Your brother," he stared at Ethan, "failed a test. But sometimes failures are useful." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You lied," he said. "You told me family would be safe if I did this." "We didn't lie," Gray said. "We told you what we offered. You chose, and you chose badly." The men stepped closer. There was a hum of threat, like a low current. For the first time since this began, I felt something unmake inside me. I was terrified, yes. But there was also something else. A rising, fierce sense of finality. I had come this far. I had watched my family flay under scrutiny and fear. I had been followed, mocked, threatened. I had enough blood on my hands from merely living through this. If the only way out was to fight here, with Ray's help or alone, then I would. Do something, I hissed at Ray. He looked at me, and something in him shifted, a sliver of the man I once trusted. For one heartbeat, I thought he might turn on Gray. He didn't. You promised me, he said, voice raw. They said if I helped bring one of their men in, I'd be free. They promised safety for my sister's kid. You promised what? I whispered. They made me choose, Ray said, voice breaking. Either I ran roadside jobs for them, or they'd make things worse. They said they'd burn everything down. I have a kid, Lily. I couldn't. Shock cut through me like ice. He had chosen his child over Ethan. Over us. It was predictable in a sick way. People sell out for the ones they love. But betrayal had a taste like iron. You brought me here, I said. You arranged it. Ray's eyes burned. I didn't bring you. Ethan did. It's his test. Gray smiled. Such delicious complexity, he said. You've all been puppets, and now we see who cuts the strings. This was it. The edge. I thought of Mom and Dad sleeping upstairs, oblivious to the moment that might end them. I thought of the photos, the letters, the nights in the woods. I thought of Ethan, who had once held my hand on the porch, who had told me stories about monsters. If he had truly chosen them, I could not forgive him. If he had been forced, then our fight was a righteous one. I took a breath and did something reckless. I walked toward Ray. You help us, I told him. You help us now. Tell me everything you know about schedules, contacts, everything. You give it to me, and I go to the DA on Monday. You go with me. We expose Gray and Ames logistics. We put everything to the light. Lily, you don't understand. Then explain, right here. Tell me why you named yourself on the list. Tell me why you talked to them. Tell me why Ethan was on that truck with Marcus. Tell me the truth. Silence stretched like a breath held too long. Ray's shoulders trembled. He looked at Ethan, and then at Gray, and then at me. The men around us shifted, uneasy, sensing the change. Finally, Ray spoke. Gray is not invincible, he said. He is careful, but he is not perfect. He thinks in cash flows and men who obey. He never considered loyalty once it was betrayed. There's a ledger. Ames Logistics keeps a ledger in an offshore account. A list of transfers. It's encrypted on a laptop kept at Gray's safe house. If that laptop is found, it will blow everything open. I can get you the location. I can show you how to get it. But once we move, they'll know. They'll come down like a storm. And your kid? I asked. Who protects them then? Ray looked like he might crumble. Then he gripped my arm. I can trust two people now. You and the guy at the DA named Malik. Malik owes me more than a favor. He'll move the case if we hand him the ledger. He'll secure protection. But we have to move tonight or Gray moves it. If we move tonight, I will bring you to the safe house and get the laptop. Ethan will come too. He will help. He owes them, and he can get in. He's their boy, not. Gray laughed. A cold, mirthless thing. So theatrical, he said. You will do this? You will run to the arms of the law with our ledger? Bold. We'll do it, I said. The words weren't brave. They were a promise to myself. The men around us shifted. Ethan looked at Ray with something like hatred and relief mixed together. You'll do this, and then run? Ethan asked. Ray whispered, I'll stay. I'll pay. I will do whatever it takes. There was a strange light in his eyes then. Not confidence, but a kind of willingness to give himself up in order to buy other lives. The math of his sacrifices became clear. His daughter, his debts, his cowardice, all traded for the hope of one right act. Gray's smile sharpened. Fine. Attempt the theft. Fail, and I will enjoy tearing this family apart. Succeed, and you still die. But we enjoy the theater. Carry on. We walked out of the mill in a straggle of motion. The night felt different, heavier. We all knew the stakes had ratcheted into something neither of us could control. Ray moved like a man with a deadline in his bones. Ethan walked behind him, hands tucked in his jacket. We got to the safe house on the edge of town, a rental in a place no one lived in. An industrial unit with a metal door and a single bulb hanging crookedly. Ray rattled the lock with a code he said he'd paid for, and the metal door rolled up to reveal a space that smelled like motor oil and secondhand smoke. There, among crates and plastic tarps, a laptop sat on a folding table. It's in the back, Ray said. Gray keeps it in a steel suitcase locked to the floor. I have the key. We moved slow. My breath came too fast. My hands trembled as Ray knelt and turned the key. The suitcase clicked open with a hollow, satisfying sound. The laptop gleamed like a sliver of proof. He typed, and the screen opened to a folder marked Finance. The numbers scrolled. Bank names, wire transfers, Ames Logistics, safe accounts in offshore banks, names that made my blood run cold, politicians, police, contractors. In the list, there was a line that made my breath stop. An account number tied to a local businessman who had been on the city council for years. The same man who'd nodded in focus groups and smiled at neighborhood barbecues. He had a lot to lose. I snapped a photo of the screen, hands shaking. Ray copied files onto a thumb drive with hands that trembled like he was stealing from a church. Ethan watched like a man seeing his own life unspool. I still couldn't quite tell if he was relieved. We were silent for a beat that felt like forever. Then footsteps outside. Heavy boots? The sound of a door being forced. Gray had a taste for dramatic timing. We had been sloppy. They burst in like a tide. Men with radios, faces hard, and then Gray, bigger up close, angrier. "This is a betrayal," he spat. "You will pay." Ray didn't move. He stood like a man who'd made his choice. Ethan stepped forward. I thought he might fight them, might do something insane. Instead, he turned and shoved the thumb drive into my hand. "Go," he said. "Run." I didn't hesitate. I ran. The world became a tunnel of noise. Shouts, a struggle, a sound like something breaking. I ran to my car, drove like my life depended on it, because it did. My chest felt loose, unmoored. I called Malik on the way, hands white on the steering wheel, breath ragged. He answered on the second ring. "We're coming to secure them," he said. His voice was calm, but sharp. The kind of man who could move a machine because he'd been in the machine for years. By the time I pulled into the DA's underground parking lot, 2 unmarked cars were waiting. Men in suits met me, iPhones buzzing. Malik's face was set like someone who'd read the worst and decided to act. "Get in," he said, and I handed him the drive as if I were passing an object that might explode. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with the terse respect of someone who recognizes risks. The next 48 hours were a blur of procedure and motion. The DA's office moved with a cold efficiency I both hated and needed. They got warrants based on the data we brought. They moved quietly, wrapped in discretion, and at dawn, in a pre-dawn operation lit by floodlights, the police, real police, not the complacent kind, hit the safe house and Gray's known addresses. It was messy. Gray's men were arrested in scattered locations. Marcus was at a diner with a cigarette, and when officers came in, he bolted but didn't get far. Ames Logistics accounts were frozen. The ledger we took was real and damning. The names in it led to resignations and indictments. The town convulsed when the names of local officials surfaced. People shook their heads and pretended not to remember seeing Gray's courier unload crates. It was the kind of public shaming that leaves stains. Ray surrendered quietly the next day. He walked into the DA's office, shoulders slumped, but face steady. He confessed what he'd done. The initial favors, the transport, the knowledge of Gray's teams. He said he had been coerced and that his motive had been fear for his child. The DA listened with clinical notes. Ray's cooperation meant a plea deal. Reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. In court, he would help trace funds, testify about logistics, and explain how Gray moved and hid and bought silence. I watched him through it all, feeling a calculus of anger and pity I couldn't separate. He had helped to break my family, yes, but he had also, in the end, helped us bring it down. Maybe that was penance. Maybe it was survival. Either way, he would carry the consequences. Ethan came home while the raids were rolling. He walked through our gate, a changed man. He was thinner, both from fear and from choices made on his knees. He had a police escort and a prosecutor hovering like an ambulance light. He had to talk to detectives, to explain, to cooperate. He told the truth in small doses. How Marcus had seduced him with money and status, how Gray moved men like pawns, how one debt could spiral into phrases like, "You work for us now." He told them about the ledger and why he helped us access it. He told them the truth of his fear. The trials that followed were long and gritty. Gray tried to paint himself as a businessman, a man who moved product and employed workers. Witnesses came forward, some brave, some forced. Marcus turned on his boss in exchange for lesser time. Ray testified with a trembling voice about the men who'd leaned on him, about the calls and the threats and the offers. In court, truth is pieces of a larger puzzle, and our pieces finally fit. Gray's empire came down like a house of cards. In the end, Gray got a long sentence. The politicians and the officers on that ledger resigned or were indicted. Ames Logistics was dissolved publicly, its shell status revealed. The town had to face the rot hiding beneath the everyday. The DA gave us protection, new locks, relocation offers, a witness protection plan for anyone who needed it. They took our statements and promised us safety. The kind that is never complete, but that at least tries. Mom and Dad were there in the courtroom the day Gray was sentenced. Mom looked hollowed out, older by a decade. Dad's face was stoic, but his hands trembled when he gripped mine. After the sentencing, we walked home in a sun that seemed too bright for the scars we carried. It was the kind of day you expect to fix everything and then discover its limits. We had truth, and still there were things we could not reclaim. Rebuilding was slow. Ethan volunteered at a shelter, took evening classes, and began working to repay what he had stolen. He visited Ray once before the man's plea agreement took him away for a reduced sentence. They spoke in a gray visiting room with vending machines and the hum of fluorescent lights. When Ethan came out, he had a look that mixed grief and relief, like someone who had been yanked from a river and knew how close he had come to drowning. Ray served less than the worst of us feared because his cooperation was valuable. He was not freed, but he was not left to rot, and his daughter was placed with a family member while he did his time. There were no dramatic reconciliations. We didn't hug and declare family healed on a Tuesday afternoon. We learned the shape of a new normal. Mom volunteered at groups for families of missing people. Dad went back to work, quieter, his hands calloused with honest labor. Ethan moved into a small apartment near the shelter where he worked. I started volunteering with a legal aid group because I wanted to help others who couldn't navigate the system that had almost swallowed us. There were nights I woke up choking with the memory of the mill and Gray's smile. There were mornings when I walked past the pier and felt the old fear like a muscle twitch. Healing is not a straight line. It is a series of small mercies and daily choices. I made new vows, not to forget, but to live. To make sure Mom and Dad's names weren't thinned by whispers. To make sure Ethan had a life that didn't circle back to the men who'd sold him. Sometimes the town looked at us differently. Some neighbors were kind in a way that tried to make amends by mowing our lawn or bringing casseroles. Others pretended nothing had happened and greeted us like ordinary ghosts. The newspaper ran a series of pieces about Gray and the complex web of power that had hid him. People debated, blamed, and sometimes learned. There were smaller victories that mattered in private ways. Ethan learned to make lasagna without burning it. Dad took me fishing one autumn morning and taught me how to bait a hook with steady hands. Mom planted a small flower bed in the front yard, bright marigolds that burst like promises against the gray. None of it fixed what had been stolen, but they were stitches, tiny and brave. A year after the raids, I opened the old desk drawer and found the first letter taped to an envelope. My hands paused above it. The jagged handwriting that had once made my blood run cold now looked like a remnant of a different era. Sharp, childish, cruel. I thought about burning it. I thought about saving it. Instead, I folded it back into its envelope and slid it into a box labeled evidence. I did not want to lose it. I did not want to keep it. I wanted the choice to be deliberate. Sometimes, in that quiet pre-dawn space, I read through the journal pages Ethan had once hidden in the attic, the same kinds of notes my father had scribbled. And I tried to understand how a person with good bones could get so crooked. There are no simple answers. There are circumstances and choices and small betrayals that compound until someone is not the person they used to be. The town healed in public ways. A stricter oversight of contractors and shell companies. A hotline for suspicious activity. Mandatory reporting that actually meant something. Kids at school learned new drills and practical plans. Teachers were trained and policies were rewritten. We were punished with changes, and sometimes justice looks like responsibility redistributed. We were quieter at the dinner table. We learned to listen without assuming the worst or the best. We learned to let silence be a companion rather than a hunger. That was the hardest lesson. My father never said thank you for the ledger or the drive or the ways we dragged the truth into the light. He didn't have to. His quiet presence, the marks of age that softened him, were the only thanks I needed. I still dream about the man in the woods who pointed a gun at me and the hollow, clinical smile Gray wore as we rifled through folders. I still have nights when a knock at the door makes my stomach drop into a pit. But those nights are fewer now. They have been replaced with others. Coffee with friends who stayed, classes I teach in the evenings about policy and safety, a small apartment that smells like lemon cleaner and dawn. My life is not the one I might have chosen. It is the one I built from the wreckage, repaired with stubborn hands. The last time I saw Gray was at sentencing. His eyes were dull behind the glass, and the judge read the years like a balance being settled. He did not shout or accuse us. The looks in the courtroom that day were not of triumph, but of a strange, exhausted relief. You can win in court and still be hollow. We were hollow, but the hollowness was edged with the warmth of survival. After everything, someone asked me once if I thought the world was fair. I said, no. They looked surprised. So why keep fighting? They asked. I thought about it and said, because fairness is not the point. People are. That felt like a small, dangerous truth. We live in a world where pieces are traded and debts are counted, where some thrive on other people's quiet. The only defense is to keep looking, keep telling, and keep pulling threads until the web shows. That is how we change things, not with vengeance, but with weary, relentless truth. Ethan calls sometimes now. His voice has a steadier timbre tempered by responsibility. He helps with Mom's errands and brings over lasagna on Sundays. Ray writes from time to time. His letters are full of small apologies and large debts. Mom planted a row of marigolds that I tend to when I visit. Sometimes I leave a small handprint in the soil, a ritual I made for myself. A way to mark that I had been here and that I'd chosen to keep living. The scars are in the dark parts, the places that sting when we touch them. At night, when the house is quiet and the lights are low, I sometimes take out the first, jagged letter and read it once. My fingers trace the lines like a map I no longer follow. It tells me who I was and who I nearly let be defeated. It reminds me that monsters can sit across from you at dinner and smile, that people choose power over goodness, opportunity over love. It also reminds me that the truth leaks eventually. Through an attic journal, a grainy security feed, a thumb drive copied in shaking hands. If you asked me now if the world is kinder than it was before any of this started, I'd hesitate. The arithmetic of human cruelty hasn't changed, but we changed the calculus in our corner. We found a ledger, we handed it to men who could act, and we refused to be quiet. That refusal saved my brother. It exposed men who thought themselves beyond consequence. It gave my family a sliver of a chance. The last piece of paper I keep, tucked into a book on my shelf, is the one Ethan pressed into my hand on the tracks. The list that had his name, and Ray's, and the others. Now, when I look at it, it feels less like a threat, and more like a ledger of survival. It marks the moment when I stopped hiding and started naming things. Sometimes I still wonder about the people who didn't get rescued. The names that never made it onto any list. The corners of the world where Gray's kind of man still moves unseen. I think about them, and I try to find ways to make systems better, less porous to that ease of corruption. It's endless work, unsatisfactory, slow. I also know this. When the night presses down and the wind creaks at the eaves, when fear tries to make the past a permanent tenant, I stand up. I water the marigolds, I teach a class, I help a family file a report. I answer the phone when someone else is ready to say, finally, they took my son. And I hold their hand through it. There are no dramatic endings left to me, only the tedious, fierce work of looking after people. The ledger is still in evidence, the trials are over, and Gray sits in a cell where the world's bigger men meet their smallness. He is no longer the shadow over our town. That, for now, is enough. I still sleep with the pocket knife near my bed sometimes. I sleep better when I've emptied my inbox of letters that threaten. I sleep best, oddly, after I've planted a new row of marigolds in the spring. Life has a strange way of stitching itself back together with ordinary acts. Chores, dinners, small apologies, shared coffee. Not heroic, not cinematic, human. And that's how I finish this. Not with a last climax or a dangling question, but with the fact that we kept living. We kept our days. We kept our family messy and imperfect and present. The men who thought they could orchestrate our despair were stopped. Not by miracles, but by stubborn people who refused to be manipulated. That is the story I tell now. Not of monsters lurking in the woods alone, but of the long, boring work of truth. The last line I ever wrote in the journal I keep is simple and ugly and honest. We were afraid. We were betrayed. But we kept each other. If anyone reading this ever finds themselves facing the kind of quiet, accumulating threat that creeps in through the mail slot and the camera lens, know this. Name it. Find someone who can help you name it. Keep records. Trust your gut. The world will not always protect you, but sometimes the world is just people. And if you gather enough people who refuse to be silent, you can make a system work. You can make a ledger scream. I made the ledger scream. And that is how we began to breathe again.